好，那我们最近呢，在学会这边，看了很多那个过去完成了那个生理回馈认证的这些学分的伙伴，好像有蛮多的伙伴都已经达到了4个阶段24小时的学分。好，所以我们会蛮鼓励这些伙伴，可以在我们今年，我们在11月左右会公告那个申请认证的这个时程。那我们会希望2月底以前审查完毕，然后让3月的这个年会，我们预计3月会办一个我们自己的年会。希望有第一批的伙伴可以先通过我们学会的生理回馈的认证，好，所以这个是我们第一年、第2年首要的一个任务。那接下来我们在今年左右的理监事，我们也通过了神经回馈的认证，好，所以我们今年大概在9月也办了2天的 ADHD 生理回馈的工作坊，好，那今天办了一个进阶的生理回馈工作坊，那希望对神经回馈有兴趣的伙伴。好，可以累积一下时数，然后来达到这个神经回馈的认证。好，那目前生理跟神经回馈在美国其实他们非常的 popular， 好，用在很多不同的疾病上面，然后也都有临床疗效的实证出来了。好，所以我们大概这几年参加学会美国学会的一个过程，也会很积极的想要把新的技术学回来。然后把一些很热门的讲师邀请来台湾来授课，好，所以这个部分是我们未来的目标，也会需要各位伙伴的一个支持。好，那我们今天从那个南美请到了一个非常有名的学者，好，那我们这个学者整个费用的一个过程呢，其实锡昌公司他们赞助了蛮大的一个部分，好，所以我们等一下呢，我们请那个锡昌的这个全总，好，来帮我们介绍这个讲者，好，然后让大家可以更认识他，好，那这次我们也学会也代表我也代表学会来谢谢那个锡昌公司对这个课程的支持，好，那我们接下来就把这个时间交给全总，那大家掌声欢迎他。
理事长各位老师谢谢大家。那我们就是很高兴有这个机会能够跟学会合作一起来办这个 Neurofeedback 的这个工作坊。那我们昨天也在台北，在师大也是有办的第1场，那反应都还不错。那他很 open，Santiago 他很 open。那如果说有什么想法，有什么疑问呢？也欢迎提出来，一起交流So we are very welcome to have this honor to invite Dr. Santiago to Taiwan to share and about the neurofeedback, but we also have a very strong biofeedback experience, and still be very happy to share. His experience, and later I would like to interview more detail about himself, what he do, and he have more than 10 year experience in this field. Yeah. And today we also have 2 friends from Japan, Hanamura-san and Takayama-san. 他们是日本也是做生理回馈脑波这方面的生产的厂商在日本的长野还利用这个机会在周末礼拜5到礼拜6、礼拜天来跟我们台湾的朋友一起来交流一下其实希望大家也可以很 open， 可以有什么想法大家互相交流那真的很感谢学会的协助我们就是如果有机会，我们也是希望能够多办这样的多配合这样的活动，非常有意义那我们是锡昌科技，我们是成立于民国80年，这20几年了都是在做生理心理这方面我们像脑波机、眼动仪这些有需要那我们今天也有配合学会有那个回馈单 对于有讲者的意见讲得好不好或者有什么建议，或有什么需求需要我们服务的，那我们是代理荷兰的 MyMedia， 荷兰 MyMedia 的那个生理回馈仪可能有些老师有用我们的仪器，那我们的软体是还蛮好用的它可以免费的升级，每年都有一些新的版本，每1-2年都有新的版本那也欢迎来洽询我们，你需要试用，需要 demo 也欢迎找我们。OK， 那我们就请Santiago would you like to do some little introduction?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So let's start.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay without the microphone? Yes? Good. So it is my absolute pleasure to be here in Taiwan for the first time and sharing some of my knowledge about the EEG and neurofeedback with you. We had a really good workshop in Taipei yesterday with some of your colleagues there, and we're going to do things a little bit different here because you plan for these things and you think you always have a long time thing, from 9 to 5 is a long time, and the day goes by really fast. So we're going to focus more on EEG, brainwaves, and neurofeedback, some neuroanatomy and brain functions, which I understand is it's your main interest for the workshop. So my journey into the world of neurofeedback began 10 years ago when I first took my training with Stens Corporation in the United States. And Stens is the United States distributor for the Nexus, is the branch for MyMedia in the United States. And at the time, I took my first training with Tony Hughes, doing a 5-day biofeedback, and then John Anderson for the 4-day neurofeedback. And what's going to happen today is that very likely many of you are going to feel the way I felt 10 years ago when I started doing this. And I felt your colleagues from Taipei felt yesterday. When I was looking, when I was showing them the EEG and they were looking at brain waves and we were talking about brain functions, and they all looked like they were going to cry because it was very overwhelming material. So for some of you, this might be a repetition of things. For some of you, it might be new material. But the idea is that we focus on that because I understand most of you have an interest in neurofeedback, either for intervention or for research purposes. And so we're going to do a lot of EEG work, a lot of neuroanatomy, and some demos. That's the idea, to do some demonstrations to give you an idea of how I go about doing training myself. Okay? And I'm a little different to other neurofeedback practitioners in that I like to integrate different things into my practice. And what I mean by that is that I not only I use neurofeedback and biofeedback by themselves, but I also combine it with functional medicine. I do exercise, we do nutrition, and we do psychotherapy. So, because I have found that when you combine and you integrate different modalities, you get better results. So, if we have time for that, we'll touch on how I go about training, doing integrated work, and then how I do a neurofeedback session. So how I organize it, schedule it, and change it. Because to me, neurofeedback is variable. It's not a linear concept. It's not a linear type training. You have to keep it interesting for the client. You have to keep it new for the client. You have to keep it novel for the client. So you maintain the brain's interest in what we do. And we'll talk about different types of clients, how to run different types of sessions, and different considerations when it comes to the training. Okay? And so, with that in mind, let's get started. Okay? And the first thing I want to talk about is brainwave activity. You probably have that in your folder over there. Not this one, sorry. Okay, yeah, neuromarkers. Okay. So, when you train neurofeedback when you work with neurofeedback, when you do any kind of neurofeedback, you are going to do brainwave activity. So we take a client who comes in to see us, and we do a qEEG, we do stress profile, or we do a one-channel assessment. Whatever we do, we want to see where the client is and where they want to go. And we see where I, as a clinician, am, and where, as the clinician, want to go and take that client. So neurofeedback really is teamwork. It's a collaboration between the client and the professional, and it should be kept that way all the time. It's not the client coming in, doing the assessment, you doing the training, and then you send them home after X number of sessions. Okay? From the first moment, the clinician and the client are forming a team. It's a partnership. And it's very important that the client is invested in the training. It's very important that the client is participating and gets a choice in how the training goes. Okay. I'm going to ask you a question because it's a very important one. If I show you an EEG, all of you are going to give me different opinions about diagnostics and protocols for training. All right? Now the question is, who is a real expert then? In a room full of us, all of you very smart professionals, very diligent, I show you an EEG, and all of you have different ideas for training, different ideas and considerations. The question is who the real expert is. What do you think? Who gets to be the foremost authority? Who gets to have the final say? Well, the real expert is always the client. And it is the client's brain. Your client is the one person who is going to tell you whether the protocol is being successful or not. So the real client is, the real expert, sorry, is your client. And it's your client's brain. Because we could look at an EEG and do CC training, and we're doing theta beta. And 10 sessions later, the client is not getting any better. So the client will tell you, I don't feel anything. No changes. Or the client can tell you, I'm getting worse. I'm more depressed. My sleep is worse. So we have to take the client into consideration. Because when a client comes, they come with one motive for consultation usually. I feel depressed. I'm anxious. I can't sleep well. My kid's failing at school. I'm forgetting things all the time. But beneath that is a series of comorbidities. So we have to look at the bigger picture, and we have to look at their eating habits, and we have to look at their organic function, and we have to look at a history of trauma, and we have to look at all those things. But because the client is a combination of events, and the human body is a combination of chemical factors and hormonal factors and cardiovascular factors and neurological factors. So the client is not one thing. The client is different, and it's human. So it's very important to know the brain waves. It's very important to know the parts of the brain and their functions. But it's very important to look at the client from a holistic perspective. Now, I'm not advocating that you try everything. I'm advocating for integrated. If your expertise is psychology, that's what you do. And then you refer to a physician of your trust, that you trust, to do the work. So I work alone in my clinic, and then I have a network of professionals, and we refer clients to each other all the time. So I refer to the functional medicine, and they refer to me. I refer to the nutritionist, and they refer to me. I refer to the psychotherapist, and they refer to me. I refer to the psychiatrist, and they refer to me. So we're sending the clients back and forth for integrated, multimodal assessment, which is important. So I want to ask you here, how many of you have some experience with neurofeedback, or by show of hands? At least 1 month, 6 months of experience? So, okay. Which one of you does not know anything about neurofeedback, or does not use neurofeedback whatsoever? Okay. Now, so we have different things. Some of you don't know some of this. Okay, so the idea is for you to get a basic understanding. Okay, and if you already do some neurofeedback, The idea is that you hone those skills, that you become a better professional. All right? So, with that in mind, let's talk about brainwaves. And the human brain produces two types of brainwaves: slow brainwaves and fast brainwaves. Okay? And those are very important because they have to do with arousal, the activation of the client. So when your client comes, the first thing you're going to do with the assessment is to gauge where the arousal is. You want to know if they're hyper-aroused, if they're anxious, angry, stressed out, or if they're hypo-aroused, if they're depressed, if they're unmotivated, if they're forgetting things. So it's very important to know where the arousal is. And the brain waves are going to give us a very good idea of where we are and what we have to do. And then we take those brain waves and we reverse engineer them and we dissect them to the most minute detail. Meaning, we look at hormonal issues, we look at heavy metals, we look at the gut-brain axis, we look at vitamin D, we look at all those things. Now, you don't have to be experts in all of this, but I recommend, as neurofeedback professionals that you already are, that you start looking into more of the multimodal analysis. And I'm going to give you some suggestions of books that you can read on the subject. Because you are going to see that neurofeedback it's a very integrative, inclusive field. So as a neurofeedback practitioner, it would serve you well to know the EEG. It will serve you well to know some medicine and some basic biochemistry. It will serve you well to know some nutrition. It will serve you well to know something about anatomy and physiology. So when we look at the human system, I want you to look at it from all those different perspectives. How many of you are psychologists here? Do psychology? Okay. So, a lot of you. Psychiatrists? Any of you are psychiatrists? MDs? Neurologists? Neurologists? So, very happy to see a neurologist here. Because usually, in my side of the planet, my side of the world, neurologists tend to be really skeptical about neurofeedback. So it's very nice to see somebody who's rather open. Interestingly, I went to the AAPE meeting in Orlando last April, and they presented the case of a little girl called Maggie. Maggie's an 8-year-old girl with epilepsy, and they were shooting a documentary, and I think it's available on the BFE site now, the Maggie story. If you go to BFE, you talk to Dr. Lin, and you go to the BFE website, the documentary is there. And it talks about how they did neurofeedback with this little girl, and they cured her epilepsy. So they go into detail into the story, and they talk to Jake Unkelman, which is my mentor and one of the biggest names in the field. But in essence, what happened was that when Maggie's family approached the neurologist to talk about neurofeedback, the neurologist was a little skeptical about it. He was open-minded, but he was a skeptic. And the family decided to do the neurofeedback, and then they showed the EEGs. So after 2 or 3 years of training with Maggie, they took the EEGs to the neurologist, and all of the EEGs were seizure-free. So she was seizure-free, no epileptiform activity, nothing like that. And the neurologist got really curious. So he took a look at the data and said, there's nothing I can see other than the neurofeedback that could have made those changes in the brain. And this neurologist is the leader of a consortium, a national consortium in the United States for epilepsy centers. So what they're going to do now is they're going to fund some research, and if they can replicate the results, they're going to start promoting neurofeedback for epilepsy throughout the United States. And this is a huge gain for our field. Okay? So we have empirical evidence that we can publish, and we can show that yes, there are changes in the brain, and yes, we can optimize the brain. And it's really great to have the neurologists on board, because they're the people who their patients trust the most. Okay? So when we look at the client, we see brain waves. And we're going to go from the slowest frequencies to the fastest frequencies. Okay? And the first one is our delta brain waves. So delta brain waves are the slowest, and the accepted conventional range is from 0 to 4 or 1 to 4 hertz. Okay? Some literature will say it's 0.5 to 3.5, some say it's 0.5 to 2 hertz. If someday you want to take your BCIA exam, you go with 0 to 4. So if in the exam they ask, what is the delta, the range in hertz for delta, you answer 0 to 4. Okay? For the BCIA exam, if you want to get certified BCIA. But we're going to see when we look at some EEGs that in reality, that's different. So, one thing is what you see in the lab, a different thing is what you read on books, and a different thing is what you see with your clients. Okay? So you're going to see that it changes and it's there. Now, kids produce a lot of delta. So if you have a child climb, before the age of 8 or 9, they usually make a lot of delta. And the delta should start, fading away by the time they get to 9, 10, and older. The delta starts fading away, so they don't make as much delta. Okay? So in ADD kids, it's normal to see a lot of delta activity. It's associated to cognitive deficits. So in learning disorders, dyslexia, dyscalculias, just disorders of that nature, you're going to see a lot of delta activity on the eyes open resting EEG. So adults, teenagers, and people with learning disabilities, they're going to produce more delta than we really want. Okay? And a low pain threshold, especially in our anterior cingulate cortex. So people with a lot of delta and theta in the anterior cingulate cortex, FZ, they have chronic pain. So these are your fibromyalgia patients. These are your neuropathy patients. And training down the delta helps with the pain. Okay. Now, it's also related to stroke as a consequence of a stroke, a traumatic brain injury, or it could be a brain tumor. So, in the future, as you get better and more talented at looking at the EEG, you're going to see certain brainwave patterns that could signal brain tumor. Now, the EEG and the qEEG are not going to tell you if there's a brain tumor. You suspect there's a brain tumor. You have the theory that there's a brain tumor. The only way to know is if you do an MRI or a CAT scan. So then you can refer the client for an MRI or a CAT scan to rule out anything structural in the brain, to rule out anything physical in the brain. Okay? So if you see a particular brainwave pattern and you refer the client and they find nothing in the MRI, they don't see anything in the MRI, it means that physically the brain is fine. Now functionally is a different story because EEG and qEEG are functional analysis. It's how the brain is functioning, not how the brain is structurally doing at any point. And I had a case recently, I had a 27-year male client, 27-year-old male client, very young guy. And parents came concerned with hallucinations and a lot of strange behaviors. And when we ran the qEEG, I wrote up the report, and in the report I said an MRI is necessary. So I referred to an MRI. They take the client to the neurologist with my qEEG report, and the neurologist says, I don't need to look at that. Now, when she did the MRI, she said, interesting. She looked at my qEEG report and saw the correlation. And it turned out that this client had some kind of neural degenerative disorder. It has an early form of dementia at 27. So qEEG, MRI are very important assessment tools. They can really mark the difference when it comes to assessments. Now, so if we have rhythmic high amplitude, it could be a TBI, especially if it's localized. Okay, so if you can tell by the EEG patterns if the client possibly has had a TBI, and you can tell where the coup and the contra coup, you can tell where the initial impact took place and where the bouncing and the secondary impact took place. So we're going to look at some of them. Now, we rarely reward most of the time we down-train it. So most of the time with neurofeedback, we aim to reduce the delta. Okay? We don't aim to increase it. It's very, very rare. In some cases with TBI, you want to bring up the delta. Okay, but it's very rare. So most of the time we're going to inhibit it. Now if it is diffuse, meaning it's highly distributed throughout the cortex, if you see it all over the EEG, it can be associated with ADHD or learning disorders. Now, these are some general guidelines. Okay, it's not the whole picture, so do not go by this all the time. It's important that you know this basic information, but it's also important that when you look at the client, you're going to see different. Now, it's predominant in the frontal part of the brain, and a very interesting thing is that it interacts with the glucose metabolism mechanisms. So, what that means is that some clients will have a lot of delta and theta in their EEGs, and especially with children. When I see a lot of delta and theta on the EEG, I ask the parents, does your child have a tendency to like sugars? And 7 out of 10 times they tell me yes. He loves ice cream, he loves cake, he loves donuts, okay? So, one of the first things that we do is we refer to the dietitian and we prescribe a low sugar, low carbohydrate diet. Because these kids will have problems with metabolizing the glucose. So if you have some sugar and you add some extra sugar, well, you're going to have a big trouble. Okay? Now, what happens is the child has to eat the sugar to calm down initially. But once it's metabolized, the kid gets worse. So giving sugar to a child with ADD, ADHD, or any of those characteristics is like giving cocaine to the addict. The sugar is very, very, very addictive. Okay. And normally, it's produced in the cortical. That's the type 1, sorry. So it's generated in the cortex, but it can also be subcortical. Okay. So we have cortical generators and we have subcortical generators for delta. So we have the cortical type and the thalamical type, and they function independently. So the networks do not depend on each other to function well, because you can sever the thalamus, and the cortical delta will keep working. Will keep on going. And this is what delta would look like on the EEG. This is the filtered delta. This is just the delta. And if you see between here and here, that's 1 second, and we have 1, 2, 3, 3.5. So 3.5, remember 0 to 4. 1, 2, 3, 3.5 cycles. 1, 2, 3. So, this is about a 3.5. We have here 1, 2, 3, 4. 3.5, 4 cycles per second delta time right there. So if you filter it, that's what it looks like. Now when you look at the raw EEG in its totality, right, it's not going to look like that because it's going to be embedded within the other frequencies. Then we have theta. So normally related to hypoarousal, okay, cognitive issues, low motivation, fatigue, being very tired, okay? Problems concentrating and focusing, forgetting things. Okay? So we're going to look at this, and then we're going to look at the anatomy, because it's very important. The two most important things for you to look at to do a good interpretation is what activity and where in the brain. So you look at it as delta, alpha, fast alpha, SMR, mu, high beta, and then you look in which part of the brain is presenting, and that gives you the idea. So it's very important that you study your neuroanatomy. Very important that you know your neuroanatomy. What part of the brain does what? So it relates to the brainwave activity that we're observing at that particular moment. Okay? Now again, takes time, all right? So don't get in a rush to know things because this is lifelong learning field. Okay. So inattention, it's observed in ADD, ADHD. Drowsiness, so those people who fall asleep in class, in a meeting, driving. So it could be related to sleep disorders as well. Daydreaming. So is the client that you're talking to and they're looking in the distance, and they're on a spot, and you're talking to them, and you're going, hey, Johnny, talking to you. You have to bring them back to reality. And being easily distracted. So it's part of the inattentive type of ADD. Now, it's also seen in focus and introspection during meditation. So there's a certain theta pattern that can be enhanced with meditation, which is good. It's more for global thinking, and it's got two sides to the story. So the 4 to 5 is the slower side, and the 6 to 7 is probably the better side of this. Now, depends on what you're looking at the EEG. So again, these are some generalities. It's not the whole picture. So it depends on where it's localized and what source is. Depends where in the brain we're seeing it. Right? It usually depends on where in the brain we're seeing it. So it can be related on the good side to creativity, spontaneity, memory formation, the hippocampus, and the ability to remember. So theta is good for memory consolidation. If we have some long-term potentiation, if we can get the neurons to fire just a little extra longer, we can get some memory formation. Okay? And that's usually the mechanism behind that. Now, on the negative side, it's associated to inattention, daydreaming, depression, and anxiety. So even though it's hypo-arousal, it can be related to anxiety and or depression. So as you can start seeing, most brainwaves are involved in most conditions, one way or the other. So the important thing is where in the brain and what the activity looks like. We look at the theta-beta ratio. If it is more than 3 to 1, it's indicative of ADHD. Right? Now, I want to say something important. Whenever I do a qEEG and I'm doing the interpretation for the client, or if I'm doing an interpretation in a lecture such as this one, I never ever diagnose the person with labels. So I will never tell the person, you have ADHD, you have depression, you have anxiety, okay? Why? Because these are tendencies that can be changed, that can be improved, that can be optimized. If I told the client you're ADHD and that makes them better, well then I don't need to do any neurofeedback. I don't need to provide medication. I don't need to do any type of intervention. You have ADHD. Oh, I'm cured. I can go home. Okay? If it were that simple, right? And the other thing is, it can sometimes confirm what the parents were thinking. So parents come in with their child, and I go, yeah, your child's ADHD. And they both go, we knew it. We knew our child was stupid and different. Because sometimes they say that. And the kid's there in front of them, and he's hearing that. And this little child's going, oh, I'm ADHD, I'm stupid. Yeah, I'm ADHD, I'm stupid. Because the kids will label themselves. Or even a teenager, or even an adult ADHD. So I say, you have the tendency to lose your focus. There's a tendency for you to daydream. There's a tendency for you to forget things. So I talk about tendencies. Because with neurofeedback, we can change them. We can make it better. So that's the thing. But if we have a 3 to 1 ratio, meaning three times more theta than beta, then it is ADHD. You just don't say it. I mean, you know it, but you just don't want to say it. And that's my recommendation. Now, 3 to 1 is also a slow brainwave disorders. So there's a slow reaction time, there's poor calculation, there's poor impulse control. So all those things that go with learning disabilities and behavioral disabilities, behavioral issues related to excess low brainwave activity. And increased amplitudes correspond with hypoperfusion. So the brain is not getting as much blood and oxygen as we want it to. So when you look at the topography and the delta is all red, look at all of that red all over the place, the brain is not getting enough blood and enough oxygen. So it's not functioning optimally. Brain needs three basic things to function. The neurons and the brain need three basic things to function well: glucose, oxygen, and stimulation. All right. So the glucose we get from our food and from the glucose in our system and the metabolization. Oxygen that we get from breathing and exercising, and stimulation. So stimulation is anything that stimulates the brain. Learning a language. Right? So for instance, I'm speaking in English and you're listening to me and you're trying to understand what I'm saying and you're very attentive, your brain is being stimulated. And I'm talking to you and my brain's being stimulated by the fact that I want you to get this and understand what you're saying and learn something. Okay? So learning a language, exercising, playing an instrument, traveling to another country, all those things are stimulation, and they always have to be implemented alongside neurofeedback. So don't expect that the client is going to come to your office for 40 sessions and they're going to sit there and do neurofeedback, and just by the mere fact of doing neurofeedback they're going to get better. Neurofeedback is going to help, yes, but the child needs to exercise, or the client at any age needs to exercise. They need to eat better. They need stimulation. Right? So they need to read a book. They need to go outdoors. They need to make new friends and learn a new language. Okay? All those things are very, very important. Because if we don't stimulate the brain, we don't get it to work. So we inhibit it for symptom remediation, whether it is inattentiveness, fogginess, fatigue, whatever it is, we want to inhibit and downtrain it. We use it for addictions, the alpha-theta protocols, peak performance and PTSD. Generally, we don't want to uptrain it frontally, so if we have client with frontal theta, be very wary, be very aware of that, because you don't want to uptrain that. You want to make more theta at the front of the head. Then you're going to create more hypoperfusion, and then the problems are going to get worse. So yes, we can get a client to feel worse with neurofeedback if we don't know what we're doing. So it's very important you know what you're looking at, because otherwise you're gonna create trouble. But it's predominant in our anterior cortex, anterior cingulate cortex. It's generated by the limbic system, which is relevant for a few things we're going to see later on, and the thalamus. So it's part of the cortico-thalamic loop. And depending on the location, it can be a slow alpha, and we're going to see what that means. So, this is where things start getting complicated, and I can see by some of your faces. Slow alpha, delta, theta, don't worry. But we'll take a look at that closer. So, some studies that have been done to identify certain types of algorithms. You can do it with go, no-go tasks, so look at the ERPs and different types of things. And interestingly, Kropotov, if you can get Yuri Kropotov's book. Yuri Kropotov is a neuroscientist and is the designer of the MITSA amplifiers in Russia. He has a new book, and he mentions the theta activity being more prominent in Asians at the vertex. So for you guys, as compared to Europeans or Western nations, you produce more theta here. It's more prominent, okay? And why is that? Because you make more emphasis in math. And that's a byproduct of math learning. So it's an ERP that responds to go, no-go, and arithmetic and numeric tasks. And because in Asia the emphasis is put on math more so than other countries, we see some brain differences in their function. So that's quite interesting. it's associated with the activation of metabolic activity in ACC. So again, the limbic system is highly involved in theta. So it's highly involved in anxiety, depression, and trauma. The midline that we see is activity from the hippocampus by those pyramidal neurons. And they can change between 4 and 10 hertz. So even though the traditional conventional range is 4 to 8, in the EEG you will see sometimes 10 hertz alpha, type alpha. Okay? And we'll see what that looks like. So it's done by long-term potentiation. And long-term potentiation means we get the neuron to fire a little longer. So we get the synapse to take a little longer for the memory to be consolidated. And neurofeedback is one of those ways by which we can achieve long-term potentiation. Because we are training with operant conditioning, meaning if your brain takes more than half a second to sustain the alpha, then we get a feedback, we get a reward. So by increasing the time, we're asking the neuron to just hold it for a little longer. And then it goes back to the resting potential. And then we push it, and then we go back to the resting potential. So, it's that pushing back and forth that gives us the LTP, that gives us the memory consolidation. And you can see on the EEG, when a person's brain is not consolidating that very well, you can see that the activity starts to desynchronize, so the channel looks flat. So there's not a lot of firing going on in the neurons in those networks. And you can tell that there's something going on there. So the neurons are not communicating, and they're not sending the message where it needs to be sent. Okay. So, working memory, issues with theta, memory codification, especially episodic memory, remembering episodes, events. So this is the type of person, traumatized patients, PTSD patients will have a lot of episodic memory issues, where they dissociate and they don't remember what happened 5 seconds ago. So they say, oh, I want to tell you something, and they get interrupted. And then 5 seconds later you tell them, what were you going to tell me? And they go, I forgot. I don't remember. So they literally forget within seconds. And you can see a lot of theta activity in that, sometimes T5. So the midline theta, which is abnormal, so if you see a lot of theta in your CZ, FZ cortex, is one of the ADHD subtypes. So traditionally in psychology, you go with DSM-4 or DSM-5, right? DSM-4 to DSM-5, which lists a cluster of symptoms, and the person has to meet some of those symptoms to be diagnosed with something. Now, that it gives you a general idea, and that's classifying everybody within the same category. But when you look at the brain, and you look at different ADHD types, then we have subtypes or phenotypes. So it's genetic variations of the same diagnosis, which manifest as different things in different parts of the brain. Okay? And when we look at the EEGs, I'll show you. So one of the subtypes is the theta midline. So if you look at the EEG and you see that theta rhythm, and you look at MC and CZ, that's one of the subtypes. But you can have frontal alpha or occipital alpha ADD. You can have mu rhythm ADD. You can have epileptiform activity type ADD. So it's really important to look at the brain. Do not go by the mere diagnosis of a book. Look at the neuronal substrates. It's very important that we look at the brain. So Probotov, if you can get his book, and he says when the theta presentation in sites different to FC and PC should be considered abnormal. So you have theta anywhere else other than FC and PC, you need a database comparison. And you can use NeuroGuide or the HBI database. There's a NeuroGuide is the most popular one in the market. It was created by Robert Thatcher in the United States. And a lot of, do you guys use it here, Dr. Lynn? NeuroGuide? Okay. Purchase it, yeah. It's a very, very thorough, very well designed database. It's one of the most popular in the market. I don't use it, but a lot of my colleagues do, and they really like it. And for research purposes, it's very useful. So this is what theta would look like. And again, so how do we know what the rhythm is? We count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. See? 1 cycle, 2 cycles, 3 cycles, 4, 5 and 6 cycles, 6 hertz. Now, keep in mind, this is filtered, but it gives you an idea of the morphology, and it gives you an idea of the range. So you can count the number of cycles on each second, and it gives you an idea of what rhythmicity is presenting at that particular point. So this is just to give you a visual idea of what it looks like. And then when you embed them together in the EEG, you will train your eyes to be able to identify them without filtering them. It just takes a lot of repetition. You know, one time I went to my mentor Jay Gompuman 5 years ago, and I said, "Yeah, Jay, what's the best way to learn how to read the EEG?" And he says, "Well, you have to sit down and take EEG after EEG after EEG after EEG, and then you read it and you read it and you read it and you read it." So 5 years later, I'm doing that. Jay hasn't been looking at EEGs for 40 years or something. I mean, he's looked at more than 500,000 EEGs. So it takes time to trim the eye. When you first look at this, you go, "That's impossible." And the more you do it, the better you become at it. Okay? So it's just a matter of training it. And we have alpha, which is 8 to 12. So again, if you take the BCIA exam, 8 to 12 is the answer. Do not answer anything other than 8 to 12 because you're going to fail that exam. That question. And it's related to relaxed focus. So the brain is in an idle state. It's neutral. There's no metabolic processing. The brain is resting. Sitting down, taking the sun, drinking a pina colada, waiting to take action. All right? So that's what alpha means, usually. So if you want to train visualization skills for athletes, anybody here interested in working with sports? Nobody? Okay. If you are ever interested, the alpha rhythm is a very popular rhythm. It's related to emotional trauma, to artistic skills, and visual memory. So for athletes to tell them how to visualize, or even for artistic type clients, if you want to help them visualize, normally you're training the alpha rhythm. Now it's also related to inattention. So you have another subtype of ADD, which is the slow alpha inattentive. It's related to insomnia. It's related to people who talk too much. It's related to meditation, and like I said, an idle state where the brain is ready to respond. It's resting. There's no metabolic uptake or consumption or usage. The brain is just there ready to respond. So it's in a car with a gear shift, it's the neutral. And the brain is ready to shift into gear and go into action. So the neutral, you're standing there and you're waiting for the order. That's what alpha means for the brain, in general terms. So training the alpha can train the brain to be more rested and more ready for action if needed. So you can achieve, one of the things you can achieve is physical relaxation. It's really useful for physical relaxation. So in athletes, when they have long competitions and long practice sessions, we sometimes train the alpha rhythm to help them relax physically and be rested and be recovered and ready for the next thing. If it is 9 to 13, you're awake and relaxed, again, in general. But you can also have fast alpha and be anxious. Because that's one of the types of anxiety. This alpha over 10 hertz, synchronous alpha over 10 hertz is going to be a lot of anxiety. So this is your anxiety client, or depression. It means meditation and inner peace, awake and relaxed, is related to daydreaming. So if you have below 10 hertz, alpha below 10 hertz, daydreaming, It could be depression, either above or below. It's related to OCD, ADHD, anxiety. It could be a sign of a TBI. Now, I didn't put that here, but slow alpha below 10 hertz, it could mean that the person is using drugs, especially marijuana. So some marijuana users, you can confront them. You look at the EEG, and you suspect that they're smoking it, and you go, huh, I see all that marijuana you're smoking, it's making you feel stupid. And they open their eyes and they go, how do you know I'm smoking marijuana? Please don't tell my parents, and this and that. So you can gauge it. You have to ask if you suspect it, but it's a good indication. So again, it's hypoperfusion if it is lower than 10 hertz. And it's the optimization, again. So the brain is an idle state, it's resting. Okay, so it's good for the brain. We need alpha for the brain because we need it to rest. We cannot go on and on and on all the time. At some point we need to be rested and ready to respond. Again, sensitive to glucose metabolization, so sugar diets will help it. Especially if it is low frequency, high amplitude. So low frequency, high amplitude means it's low up, 8 to 10, 8 to 9. You will say it in the EEG is really high synchronous. So it will really, really ruin your day if you have a lot of it. So we uptrain to relieve symptoms of what? Depression, we downtrain for anxiety. But if we want to achieve more relaxation in general, we uptrain the alpha. If we want the person to sleep better, we want to uptrain the alpha. Again, depends on where in the brain it is presenting itself, right? Where is it predominant? In the parietal and occipital regions. That brings me to an important point. When you're looking at the EEG, you want to focus your attention in part at PZ. Okay? So the parietal midline, because that's called the alpha background rhythm. All right, so that's your baseline rhythm, which is an indicator of self-regulation. Now, alpha with the eyes closed is going to be greater than the alpha with the eyes open. When you close your eyes, alpha gets bigger back here. When you open your eyes, it's supposed to suppress. So if the person opens their eyes and the alpha is still big, we have a problem. All right? And we want a basic background alpha rhythm back here to achieve self-regulation. So if you're looking at the eyes open EEG and the person doesn't have a lot of alpha at PZ, it means they're not being able to self-regulate. Which means you tell that person, I want you to stress out. And they go, no problem. But if you tell them to relax, they go, oh, wait a second, what is that? How do you do that? Okay? So it's the person who has learned to stress out, has learned to be anxious, but they cannot relax. Even if their lives depend on it. So, very important. Now, the other important one is the peak alpha frequency. Okay, the PAF, or peak alpha frequency, which is an indicator of brain processing speed, and is an indicator of intelligence. So, that's measured with the eyes open EEG, eyes open resting EEG. So when you look at the peak alpha frequency, you look at the spectral analysis, and you want to see where the alpha, where the highest peak of alpha is, how many hertz. Okay? So for people who are 0 to 10 years old, below 10 hertz is okay. So if you have a child with 8 hertz alpha at PZ, that's fine. Now, from people who are 10 years of age and older, which means all of us in this room, ideally more than 10 or more. Okay, so for people who are 10 years of age older, 10 or more. So if you have a client who's 22, 23, 45, 86, and their alpha is at 7, you have a serious compromise. All right? So you have, normally when I see people who are above 10 years of age, and I look at the peak alpha frequency and it is 8, 9, 7, the first thing I do is a CI, an IQ test, sorry. So IQ assessment. Now the peak alpha frequency is not going to tell you what the child's or the person's IQ is. You need to test it. but it's a good predictor of that. And it's called a brain brightening protocol or brain boosting protocol. So you can train C4 and PC. If you want to increase IQ, if you want to help with intelligence, if you want to train learning disabilities, C4 to PC. That's your intelligence or your IQ hub. And normally, what do you train? Well, if the alpha is slow, you down train the alpha. If the delta is slow, you down train the delta. If the theta is slow, you down train the theta. And normally, what you want to reward is 12 to 15. So you normally, inhibit anything that's too high, whatever you see on the EEG, and then you reward 12 to 15. And that really helps you. And there's some literature that talks about IQ points being increased with neurofeedback. So it's somewhere between 4 or 10 points, which is very significant. So we can increase IQ in a person with neurofeedback. So we want to look at the alpha background rhythm. And same thing, if the person closes their eyes and the alpha suppresses, if the alpha doesn't increase parallelly and occidentally, there's a problem. It could mean trauma. It could mean a sleep disorder. It more than likely it is going to be anxiety. So we need to look at that. So as your thalamus and the cortex, the difference are related to age. As we age, our alpha peak frequency starts declining. As we get older, the peak alpha frequency starts declining. So when we're young, we make alpha, and by the time we're 30, 35, we start getting a reduction. Okay? The normal attrition rate, for the peak alpha frequency is 0.5 hertz per decade. So to lose 0.5 hertz per decade is within the normal range. If you're losing more than 0.5 hertz per decade, you have a problem. And you have to look at dementia. You have to look at some kind of neural degeneration disorder. You have to look at different things. It could be. I remember I had a lady last year she's 50 years old, so she's a young woman, and her peak alpha frequency was like 8 hertz or 7 something, very, very slow. And so when I sent her to the functional medicine doctor and they did all the testing, it turns out she had lead poisoning. She had a lot of lead and aluminum in her blood, and that was causing the brain to degenerate. Now, one of the things that the functional medicine doctor told me is, if we had not detected it on time and she had gone on for another 5 years, she could have probably developed Parkinson's or something. So it's very important to look at different things. So in a person, if you see a low peak alpha frequency below where you want to see it, test for everything that you can think of, right? And an IQ test is a good test for it. So there's 3 types: the posterior alpha, the mu rhythm, which we will talk about more later, and the medial and temporal, which is only detectable with magnetoelectric magnetoencephalography. So that's not something that's very. So if we want to cut down flashbacks in PTSD, we suppress it. So a lot of people who are traumatized will not make alpha with the eyes closed because they don't want to go into a flashback. They don't want to remember. Because alpha with the eyes closed, it helps you visualize that. Okay? And then again, peak alpha frequency changes with age. So that's what alpha would look like in the brain. And again, if we count percent, 1 second, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we got an 8 hertz alpha rhythm here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay? And if you see the peaks, for instance, if you see the amplitude here, it's larger in the back. So we have slower alpha. You see that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we have 6 hertz rhythm in the background. See that? So the higher the amplitude, the slower the frequency. We'll review that then. SMR. Now, it is only SMR if it occurs in C3 and C4. You